in Gaza.
The only starvation in Gaza...
Famine is now underway in Gaza.
No, the only starvation in Gaza is the starvation campaign that Hamas is behind it and the UN is behind it. And I have to admit, it was a very successful campaign. You know, they tried a few months ago to run a campaign about the hospitals, which we proved that it was a lie. And today they're running the campaign about the starvation.
You're not allowing journalists into the Gaza Strip, so we are having to rely on people, for example, from the World Food Programme. And Cindy McCain, the executive director of the World Food Programme, has said we need to flood Gaza with large-scale food aid immediately and without obstruction and keep it flowing each and every day to prevent mass starvation. Ross Smith, the WFP emergency director, says this is unlike anything we have seen in this century. It reminds us of previous disasters in Ethiopia in the past.
Israel's UN Ambassador Danny Danon went on Sky News and called confirmed famine in Gaza a fabricated campaign run by Hamas and the UN. Not a misrepresentation, not a complicated situation, fabricated. Every agency lying. The World Food Programme lying. The IPC lying. Over 100 aid organizations apparently running a coordinated disinformation operation. And he said this while the integrated food security phase classification had just confirmed famine conditions affecting over 500,000 people. Let's watch this exchange in full, and I'll give you my complete thoughts on the other side.
Well, I spoke this evening to Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon. I began by asking him about the UK's plan to recognise a Palestinian state. Just have a listen.
Israel agreed for a ceasefire many times. We said yes, Hamas said no. And if you don't believe us, you should ask the negotiators, the US, Egypt and Qatar. And they will tell everyone that Israel is not the problem. Israel is not the obstacle for a ceasefire. So hopefully there will be a ceasefire before September. You know, we don't interfere on decisions of other countries, but with all due respect, all those declarations and empty speeches and conferences that we are seeing in the UN, they will not bring any progress to the region. We have to move forward. We have to bring back the hostages and get rid of Hamas. That is the only hope, not only for us, but also for the Palestinians.
Whether this is symbolic or not, a symbolic gesture, Ambassador Danon, we are now talking about Israel's closest allies, countries like France, now Britain, countries that you want to court like Saudi Arabia, also at this conference. That means that Israel has, you know, for the last 22 months, because of its actions in Gaza, has in some ways had some of its closest allies turn to Israel and say, what you are doing is wrong.
We are on the same side. I would expect the UK and France to support our fight against Hamas and to put pressure on Hamas to accept the ceasefire. But what they are doing now, they are actually pushing Hamas to the other side, because some people in Hamas might think that now is not the time to move forward for a ceasefire, because look what's happening in Europe.
Well, many would say, look what's happening in Gaza, including many Israeli officials and prominent Israeli voices. And I'm just going to quote those to you. Ehud Olmert, Israel's former prime minister, just yesterday said, I've said it before and I haven't changed my mind, that there are things which are intolerable and unforgivable, which we are responsible for what happens in Gaza. Last month, he said, Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza, and that never since its establishment has the state of Israel waged such a war. Yesterday, two leading Israeli human rights groups, B'Tselem and the Physicians for Human Rights Israel, accused Israel of genocide in Gaza. They described a deliberate and systematic extermination of the health system in Gaza. Israeli-born genocide scholar Omer Bartov said today the IDF is primarily engaged in an operation of demolition and ethnic cleansing. These are not your allies. These are not other states. These are not people trying to, in your words, whether they're trying to encourage or appease Hamas. These are Israelis. This is an Israeli former prime minister. This is two leading human rights groups in Israel.
So all those sources that you mentioned are radical forces, and we are a democracy. We allow free speech to everyone, even if you spread lies. And Prime Minister Olmert is lying. He doesn't have a clue of what's happening today. And those organizations you mentioned, for years, they act against Israel. no matter what's happening on the ground. And we know that there is no genocide in Gaza. There are no war crimes. On the contrary, for us, the suffering in Gaza, it's a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy.
Well, the images speak for themselves, Ambassador Danon, and it's something that President Donald Trump has also spoken to. He has said, you cannot fake the images that we're seeing. He says and has acknowledged that what he is seeing is starvation in Gaza. And I'm also going to quote Anthony Aguilar, a retired U.S. Special Forces officer who worked for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a body that Israel put in place because you said you couldn't trust the way in which aid was being distributed by the UN. He resigned because he said he witnessed war crimes and saw the IDF shooting at crowds of Palestinians.
So first of all, we should agree that the Humanitarian Foundation is doing an important work. And you can see from the results that in the area that you have those centers, you don't have any reports for starvation claims or other reports. And I wish we had more centers. And I hope there will be more centers.
Ambassador, it's being described by many as death traps. The surgeons that I've been speaking to say that those who return from that area have all sorts of gunshot wounds to their chest, to their testicles, children as young as 11, 12 and 13 years old. I mean, you can deny this, but this is someone who worked for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation saying he saw the IDF shoot at Palestinian civilians there. Over 1,000 people are believed to have died trying to get aid from those centers.
You know, you cannot deny the fact that the foundation actually distributed millions of meals.
I'm going to quote those...
Allow me to move forward with all due respect. We want to ease the suffering in Gaza. You know, today, 300 trucks entered Gaza. As we speak,
you know that's nearly not enough. You know that there are 6,000 trucks waiting at the border, and there are many saying that the food in those trucks have expired because you've just left them on the border. And when we talk about meals, Israel claims that somewhere upward of 87,000 meals have been distributed over 3 months. 90 million meals have been distributed over the course of the last 3 months. I'm just going to quote some of those numbers to you. On Monday, the 28th, which is just yesterday, 1.2 million meals were distributed in one day. There are 2 million people living in the enclave. So we're talking about half a meal to each person. And there is uncertainty about who these meals are being distributed to and whether the most needy are getting these meals, because there is no measure in place. There are no large organizations trying to distribute these meals. You're just relying on the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is being
Hilda, with all due respect, please allow me to answer your claims. You keep reading and misleading the audience. The facts are that as we speak, you have more than 600 trucks that crossed the border, waiting in Gaza for distribution. And the UN is not distributing the aid. And instead of blaming Israel for everything, I would advise the UN to stop distributing lies and start to distribute the aid.
So are you saying that President Trump is lying when he says that the pictures speak for themselves, you can't fake this, there is starvation in Gaza?
Well, I think there is no starvation in Gaza. If there were incidents, we regret them, and the blame is on Hamas. But when you look at the number of aid that entered Gaza in the last few months, you understand that there is no problem of aid.
I've just quoted those numbers. It isn't even half a meal for a single person, and there is no clarity about whether that is going to the right people.
No, you know what you quoted. Excuse me, I have to correct you. You quoted the number from the GHF, from the foundation.
Correct.
But when you add to that the trucks that entered Gaza, and the truck that entered Gaza during the ceasefire.
No, and you know, sir, that the number of trucks entering Gaza is not sufficient, and they haven't. There's been a blockade. The hunger and starvation we have seen has also been. We're seeing for the first time the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. The IPC has said famine is underway in Gaza. That's based on a report that they have put out today, where they're saying famine is underway. So you can say that you don't believe that starvation is taking place in Gaza.
The only starvation in Gaza...
Famine is now underway in Gaza.
No, the only starvation in Gaza is the starvation campaign that Hamas is behind it and the UN is behind it. And I have to admit, it was a very successful campaign. You know, they tried a few months ago to run a campaign about the hospitals, which we proved that it was a lie. And today they're running the campaign about the starvation.
You're not allowing journalists into the Gaza Strip, so we are having to rely on people, for example, from the World Food Programme. And Cindy McCain, the executive director of the World Food Programme, has said we need to flood Gaza with large-scale food aid immediately and without obstruction and keep it flowing each and every day to prevent mass starvation. Ross Smith, the WFP emergency director, says this is unlike anything we have seen in this century. It reminds us of previous disasters in Ethiopia in the past century. We need urgent action now. Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief, says what has been delivered so far has just been a drop in the ocean of what is required. It's the beginning, but the next few days...
Let's start with the basic facts that Danny Danon spent this entire interview denying. The IPC, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the internationally recognized body that determines whether a famine designation applies, confirmed famine in Gaza in August 2025. This is the first famine ever officially declared in the Middle East. Save the Children put the number at 132,000 children under 5 at risk of death from acute malnutrition. In July 2025 alone, 63 people died of malnutrition. 24 of them were children under 5. Most arrived at health facilities already dead, their bodies showing clear signs of severe wasting. And Danny Danon's response to every single piece of that documented record was the same word, repeated over and over: fabricated, not credible, a lie. He did this on Sky News, on NPR, at the UN Security Council. Same line every time, same confidence. Zero evidence offered in return. When a journalist with the receipts in hand pushes back on every claim with documented sourcing, and the response is simply, "That's a lie," without any counter evidence, that is not a debate, that is stonewalling dressed up as a defense. The aid math he tried to use is worth examining directly because the numbers do not support his framing. He cited that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distributed 90 million meals over 3 months. The journalist pointed out the actual math on a single day. 1.2 million meals were distributed for a population of 2 million people. That works out to roughly half a meal per person on that day. And there is no independent verification mechanism confirming those meals are reaching the people who need them most, because Israel has refused to allow journalists into Gaza and has fought against UN involvement in aid distribution from the start. And here is the question that exposed the actual motivation behind Danon's defense of the GHF. Specifically, the journalist asked why established humanitarian organizations with decades of experience, the UN, the WFP, Save the Children, are not collaborating with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation if it is doing such important work. Danon's answer was that they want to control the narrative, but multiple humanitarian workers who try to be part of GHF operations have resigned, citing violations of international humanitarian law standards. A retired US Special Forces officer who worked for the foundation resigned after witnessing what he described as war crimes, including the IDF shooting at crowds of Palestinian civilians trying to access aid. Over 1,000 people are believed to have died attempting to get aid from those distribution centers. That is not a narrative dispute. That is documented testimony from someone who was inside the operation. Then the journalist read out a list of voices that cannot be dismissed as anti-Israel propaganda by any reasonable standard. Ehud Olmert, a former Prime Minister of Israel, saying there are things happening in Gaza that are intolerable and unforgivable, and that Israel is committing war crimes. B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights, Israel, two leading Israeli human rights organizations, accusing Israel of genocide and describing a deliberate, systematic extermination of Gaza's healthcare system. Omer Bartov, an Israeli-born genocide scholar, describing the IDF's current operations as demolition and ethnic cleansing. These are not foreign adversaries. These are not Hamas sympathizers. These are Israelis, prominent Israeli institutions, and Israeli scholars saying this directly. And Danon's response was to call the former prime minister a liar who doesn't have a clue what is happening, and to dismiss the human rights organizations as radical forces that have always been against Israel, regardless of facts on the ground. Even Donald Trump, who has been a staunch defender of Israel throughout this conflict, has publicly acknowledged that the images coming out of Gaza show real starvation, and that you cannot fake what is being seen when the sitting US president, allied closely with Israel, is breaking from the denial narrative. That should tell you something about how indefensible the position has become. And the story behind this interview is almost as damning as the content of it. The journalist who pushed back with documented evidence, who refused to let Danon slide on a single claim, was let go from Sky News shortly after this interview aired. While Sky News issued a personal apology to Danny Danon, the man who denied a confirmed famine hit his platform. The woman who challenged him with facts lost hers. That outcome tells you everything about the pressure being applied behind the scenes to control how this story gets covered. Famine does not get rebranded as an aid provision success story just because the person responsible for explaining it refuses to blink while denying it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification. I'll see you in the next one.